Hey all, thank you for listening, as always. Today we have a special edition of the Buddy Ruski Show. In collaboration with Let's Talk Durham, I had the pleasure of interviewing Raleigh Mayoral candidate Dr. Terrance Ruth. Over the last couple of years, Raleigh city government has been in a bit of turmoil, from the election schedule being changed to calls for a special election to unseat the current mayor prior to the end of her term. Dr. Ruth and I decided to keep things focused on his particular candidacy and what motivates him as a leader and nominee. If you're interested in following the full story, both the News and Observer and IndieWeek have done great reporting on the topic. Thanks again to Kat at Let's Talk Durham for collaborating with me on this episode. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Terrance Ruth. How you doing?
I am doing well. Yeah, thank you for the interview. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I'm in Durham, but I am always fascinated by local politics and just like, especially because, and this was part of one of the questions I asked, the triangle is forever connected. So the things that happen in Raleigh, that happen in Chapel Hill, that happen in Wake County more broadly, have an effect on the region as a whole. So, they have an effect on me as a Durham citizen. So, and just politics are interesting to me too. So
I want to just say that I'm seeing a level of civic engagement and awareness that's peaking at a college age or group that I think is really hopeful, because I hear a lot of complaints that people don't know about the mayor and what it is. I don't know if that's going to be accurate soon. I think there's a group that's pretty plugged into local, and then you're seeing a well-funded effort of people paying for voters to understand the significance of municipal elections. And so I think that's a valuable strategy, both looking at state and federal policy changes.
Were you involved in politics much at a college age?
For me, I was an educator. And here in North Carolina, educators are almost overlapped with policy and advocacy. I mean, it's almost part of the job description. But in Florida, where I received my original teacher's certificate, it didn't have that overlap. So when I came here, I was like, wow, this is refreshing. So in college, however, I was in Atlanta for my first 4 years. And my class was taught by the adjutant to Bernice King, and Coretta Scott was alive at the time. And so I had the chance to introduce the late John Lewis. And what's amazing to me is how young they were, when they were engaged. We weren't talking about old people during that time and older individuals. But now we have this assumption that, political engagement must come with a maturation, but that wasn't the case for the people we celebrate. Your MLK, your John Lewis, your Malcolm X. I mean, some of these individuals are, under 30. So, I mean, we're talking about, very ripe college age. So, yeah.
Well, what got you into politics?
Well, one, in education, what you see is the intersection of bad policy decisions. So in education, you're gonna intersect with healthcare. You're going to intersect with affordable housing. You're going to intersect with criminal justice system. You're going to intersect with gentrification. You're going to intersect with, we can keep going on this, but education is where the decisions of local, state, and federal policy decisions meet in one space. And so after a while, I started to realize that what I'm seeing takes something beyond this role of teacher. Then I began to evaluate education policy. So I evaluated education policy, was able to network with different policy leaders. And that's when I realized that the federal government has a certain level of influence, but it's just the purse. The state has decisions that impact my life and schooling. They determine the school budget for the whole state. And so for me, I started to see as I was evaluating policy, how power is negotiated between the state, the federal, and the local government. And so for me, I that's when I entered, my role as the NAACP executive director for North Carolina. And I started to see how when there's a problem, these nice little neat federal, state, local buckets is irrelevant for somebody who's suffering from something. And so as a politician, if you're only advocating for one thing, you may be missing the rest of that human being. And so I entered this space trying to see people as whole. And so that's what really moved me from the classroom into advocacy. In this state, it's not a surprise. In other states, they might be a little bit, but this state it has a very rich social justice history.
Well, and in particular here, you talked about education and policy overlapping. The teachers here have to advocate for themselves because they're constantly battling budget cuts. And we're seeing right now, not just in North Carolina, but other states dealing with what can and can't be taught and sort of the suppression of important elements of our history that may be uncomfortable for some folks, but are, again, important to the story of our nation. I'm a huge fan of the show The Wire. I talk about it all the time. And I think that's one of the things that I really appreciated it when I first watched it probably a decade ago was how well they illustrated that intersectionality of community between education and policing and the economy and all these different parts where you can't, like you said, as a politician, focus on one because people are not just these one spaces that you find them in. And so I think that's really important for us to understand as citizens of that community, and also for us to understand when we're thinking about leadership and who we want to put in positions of power. Do they understand that intersectionality of people? So I appreciate you bringing that point to light.
No, not a problem. And I think to your point, if I'm leading or if I'm representing a community and I can't identify or empathize with their lived experience, then my perspective may have huge gaps, which means my decisions will lean on that perspective. And I may miss opportunities to really serve that community well. And so I think that's also linked to that teacher role as well.
What are you hoping to bring to the mayorship in Raleigh specifically? What do you feel like it is that you can do as mayor that you may not be able to accomplish through other roles that you have in the community now?
That's a really solid question. I'm often asked that question. And usually they juxtapose that position to the school board position. But I think when you're talking about the outcomes of schools, right? When the outcomes of schools, you can directly link it to a zip code. When you're talking about an earning potential of a human being, you can literally link it to a zip code. When you're defining gentrification, you can literally link it to a wave of salaries and job opportunities into a community and then a wave that's exiting. I mean, literally, when you get down to the nuts and bolts, you're talking about streets, buildings, homes, neighborhoods. And I think that the role of the mayor, especially the capital city, can set an example and a new brand for a state that that's wrestling with how do we move this city forward with such amazing growth. I mean, this city and this state forward with such amazing growth. And I think that there's some opportunities to lead other cities by being a mayor and being an example in the city capital.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind that I mentioned in our email correspondence before is this influx of tech jobs specifically, on the horizon and that's been true for North Carolina, the Triangle specifically, in waves for the last 40 years. I mean, you think about the Research Triangle Park at its inception, what it did for the economy here, and then more recently, sort of in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, what places like Google, coming and having their little satellite offices here, places like American Underground, both here in Durham and Raleigh, Red Hat, and the growth that Red Hat has experienced, more recently, companies like Pindo, what they're able to do here. There is a significant amount of growth opportunity happening in the tech sector. But as we all know, that comes with ramifications. And for a lot of folks, they won't see the benefits of those opportunities that are coming to this region. And so I'm wondering what you think the role of the mayor is in that regard, what the mayor can do to help spread those opportunities around, so that we are not always importing talent to fill these positions, but are really growing our talent locally, so to be able to take advantage of those opportunities in those zip codes that you mentioned.
Well, Justin, your question is a really solid question. And if we don't answer this question well, I think we're going to become where those tech companies are running from, San Francisco, et cetera. So we don't answer this question well, I think we follow a trend that has a dead end. And so for me, what I'm amazed by, however, are the efforts of these major tech companies when it comes to talent development, workforce development, and equity. I was a Juneteenth speaker for Red Hat last year. And through the invitation by John Chapman, they have an organizational effort that is reaching deeply into communities of color. And they provide technology support and they hire from communities of underrepresented, of communities that have underrepresented demographics in technology. They literally have a whole department set aside for that. And I partner with IBM as well to facilitate a community-driven platform that they were building to support community leaders. And when I say community leaders, I'm talking about activists, community leaders in terms of faith leaders, very raw grassroots leaders. IBM was building and facilitating this conversation that would provide technology to these leaders so that they can amplify their voice and amplify their impact. So in my opinion, I think merging the top really technological organizations with some of the more influential community leaders and grassroots leaders, I think we have an opportunity to really build community investments in a way that we haven't seen in communities that these larger tech companies are coming from. So if we have IBM, Red Hat, Pindo, Google, Apple at a round table to support underinvested communities in Raleigh, I think it will have a significant step forward showing how we, the city, care about poor, Black and brown, underinvested neighborhoods in the city. We know already that these tech companies come with a reputation of wanting to care. Now this is our chance as a city to advocate for what that means for this area, this region, this triangle, so that they come and they contribute to the efforts to serve those who are not represented, both in the income levels they mentioned. I think it was around 200,000 per job, the housing market. So the individuals that we're talking about are not being moved out of their housing, but they're receiving jobs in which they can acquire housing. And then also, on top of that, what does it mean for the city of Raleigh to have a reputation to attract certain companies that's already leaning in that direction? I think that's more significant and more sustainable. And so a roundtable in which we have these major players, and many of them are already at the table. How do we have a strategy looking forward as to how do we mold and shape Raleigh differently than your San Francisco's, your New York's, your et cetera?
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that a little bit because that is a question that I think comes up a lot, is what will make this experience different here in the Triangle in Raleigh in North Carolina compared to your San Francisco's, your New York, where, as you mentioned, these companies are fleeing for various reasons. Do you think that they're coming here because of that type of investment that they want to do? And is there something that we can do as a community here that in North Carolina, specifically in Raleigh, to sort of preemptively shape the work or the conversation around these important issues so that we don't walk that same path with them as has happened in previous cities?
Yeah, one, the community can draft a community benefits agreement and advocate to your local municipalities to, because some of these companies exist across cities, across counties, but there's a community benefit agreement that you can have with that company to show and outline how that company will benefit local communities, in particular communities of color and poor communities. I will have that document as the beginning of the relationship so that there's accountability, so that there's a measure, that there's not just a blanket promise. Also, you need to vote leaders in office that will advocate for the community at the beginning of the relationship. That company being in that particular city or county can't mean more than you than that human being in that zip code. And so for me, I think there's a balance here that don't exist in Raleigh. I think we need to advocate for communities that they benefit from the growth and not just lose and are displaced from growth. That's one thing. The second thing I think is there needs to be a relationship between the school district, the colleges, and these tech companies. There's a Pitt College, Pitt University, just launched last year during COVID, an Industry 4.0 lab. I think it's called Innovation, Industry Innovation, I believe it is, but it's in Westmoreland County. This lab allows for communities, underrepresented, poor communities, to be exposed to the next wave of technology. That's why they call it Industry 4.0, so that they're prepared to enter that workforce, that they're prepared to be in that job market, so that the community is prepared to be in that job market. The school district, the community colleges need to be linked together to build programs and opportunities like that allow for students who are in certain zip codes or sit in certain graduation percentages in their school and in their county to have access and opportunity to leave that zip code. And there's a chance for us to do that. We have all the ingredients. All it takes is leadership now. We have all the top tech companies. We have all the major colleges. We have one of the largest in the country community colleges, Wake Tech. So the ingredients is not the issue. It's leadership that's the issue. Who's facilitating that conversation? Who's leveraging those partnerships and collaborations? And I think those are opportunities in which we can do something different that's long-standing and sustainable, that will actually create future change and not just an immediate community benefit agreement.
And do you think your role as mayor in those conversations would be mostly as a facilitator, or is there actual policy that can be implemented to help build those networks and bridges between the different educational systems and those tech companies?
Yeah, so it most of it will be facilitation because some of the responsibilities sit on the school board, some of the responsibilities sit within the district, but that facilitator role is major, and that leadership role is major. If we're not championing this as a city, if it's not the brand of the city that we are leaning into communities that's underrepresented and we're standing with them, then more than likely these conversations are not going to happen. And so I think the facilitation and the leadership role is significant for the mayor, but it takes work and homework to get these individuals into the room and make sure that everybody is aligned across this goal. And that links to the outcomes for the mayor. So if we are building a talent pipeline, that means we can retain more people. If we're building the talent pipeline, that means that more people who live here can buy a house later. If we're retaining the talent pipeline, that means that these companies will then be paying that $200,000 to somebody who grew up in Raleigh. So I mean, there's a chance to really make some significant goals, but it's going to take intergovernmental and public-private partnerships to really do that well.
What do you think will be your biggest challenge during this race for the mayorship in Raleigh, given what you know about the history of Raleigh and sort of the challenges that it faces as a city? What do you think will be your biggest challenge during this competitive race?
One, that's a really good question. I like to see one. I think challenges provide the best moments for somebody to show their leadership. I think that's number one. So if you look at last year was moments in which we've seen leaders rise to the top across municipalities, right? Very difficult year, but those who led well rose to the top. And I consider my campaign ground zero, right? For engaging duties of mayor. I consider it ground zero. I'm not assuming that I give a speech and then once, the election ends, I get started working. No, I'm working right now. Right now, I'm working on my first 100 days. Right now, I am leading in small business support. I have launched a Truth for Raleigh tour, and it's called the Truth Tour. We have an event coming up June 15th, and that uplifts and centers small businesses across the city, not just downtown, but across the city. So each of our stops on this tour will allow for me to listen to small business leaders, engage the community, and then learn the priorities of those who are not sharing in the positive growth of the city. That's significant. You hear a lot of individuals cheerleading the growth of the city. However, I would consider affordability the largest challenge right now in our city. Affordability is in a broad sense. We hear about the aggressive housing market that is making the existing housing stock unaffordable for a large segment of our city. The $80 million housing bond will not be enough for the pace of the market that we're seeing. I am working with a group of individuals that represent a mixed they represent a mixed sectors, and we're creating a faith-based affordable housing. Now, what I mean by that is this model looks at the land owned by faith communities. And we work with faith communities to either develop affordable housing units, preserve or acquire land, and repurpose existing buildings. Now, you might say, why are you starting with the faith communities? They own the most property in the city. Mm. They have land, theoretically, that's already being served. They are already theoretically serving those who need housing. And so for us, we felt that that's the best place to start. And we have a chance to do something special in Raleigh, but it requires leadership and an aggressive strategy because the market is aggressive. We can't have a lax strategy on an aggressive market. We must be as aggressive on affordability. But however, if we're talking about affordability in a more broader sense, what's also going to be a challenge is transportation access, job access. and it's just as significant. We are seeing a strain on existing transportation infrastructure, especially for those who are forced to live outside of Raleigh and then come in and work. And then we are still seeing a strain on COVID recovery on small business. And this strain sits on top of a disconnected network of small business support and representation. And I feel that I can connect small business leaders across the city by advocating for a small business affairs board or commission that can look at onboarding new businesses, ensuring diverse, business leaders, and then sustainability for small businesses. How do we sustain them once they're now, recovered from last year or from the issues that preceded COVID? So for me, I think those are some of the challenges, and that's how I will face it.
We talked a little bit about this, sort of Raleigh, being the capital city in this state that is constantly trying to figure out who it is, who it wants to be. Every election cycle, North Carolina is one of the, battlegrounds. So they are battleground states. And part of that has to do with the sort of urban-rural divide that seemingly continues to grow in this state. And because of that, our state legislature can be very contentious at times. It can be very difficult for things to move forward. And so I'm curious where you see your role as mayor of the state capital, how you can build relationships with our state legislature to really help move things forward, because it will be a challenge. There are some things that mayors can do on their own, but then in a lot of ways, cities are restricted by the state mandates. And so I'm wondering where you feel like there might be tension there, and where you feel like you are uniquely qualified to build relationships within the state legislature to try and help, move Raleigh forward as a part of this bigger effort statewide.
That's a very good question, Justin. And I want to talk a little bit about my experience, just to give context to how I would deal with that. And that question has preceded any COVID effort or anything of that nature. COVID has allowed for us to see the relationship between both the state and local, but this question definitely preceded it. I have completed a program called IOPL. It's the Institute for Political Leadership, years ago. And their primary philosophy rests on the idea of getting each fellow to build a relationship before exposing your political affiliation. This was deliberate. So they taught you how to be a candidate. They walked you through the whole process, but you were not allowed to give your political affiliation. And we met with leaders and candidates across the state. And many of our peers and alumni are in office right now. And so I enter this candidacy with existing relationships. Also, I think it is significant to mention that North Carolina benefits from a very saturated social justice and civically activated advocacy network that has for years been working on moving the state forward. And I was a part of that network as a former executive director of the NAACP state office under both Dr. Barb and Dr. Spearman. So I see my role as centering the needs, desires, and hopes of the community in policy decisions. And I see the role of mayor as really having the ability to move across parties to produce community, neighborhood, and center changes. And what's amazing to me is that the changes I see in the future is going to be less dependent on the government and more dependent on the collaboration that will center community leaders, community innovation. These tech companies sit outside of government. And so, I think and I believe that these partnerships will collectively, build an impact on how the state view policy perspectives and decisions. And it's going to start locally, in my opinion. And the book, The New Localism, speaks to that to some degree. It shows the weight of local decisions on larger state and federal decisions. And so for me, I would say the role of mayor is designed just by its role to sit outside of parties. That's why it's a nonpartisan race. The 2-year term is so that you are directly committed to the community each time. You only get 2 years to show that you are accountable and committed to their desires. And I think that accountability is healthy. And I think it allows for that person who's sitting in that role of mayor to carry that into larger policy conversation.
What is that? You mentioned only having 2 years. What does that first 100 days look like for you? What are some of the more pertinent policies that you're looking to move on because of that limited window?
Yeah, so for me, I think the window should be continuous. So we've already started already. So for me, the CACs were deleted when this council entered office. The CACs may or may not have been what people desire, depending on your perspective, but it obviously was desired by the city because there's an outcry still for the lack of community engagement platform between the mayor and the council and the community leaders. My first 100 days has already started, and we are starting right now by doing what we call community design sessions. And these community design sessions is designed to activate the community as to what they desire, what they imagine, what they hope for community engagement. We are literally listening, pulling in what the community wants to see and hear, taking the themes from that, and then we are designing with the community what a platform that engages the community should look like for the city of Raleigh. I'm not entering this election season by saying I hope, I wish. I'm saying this is what I heard. This is what the community told me. And for me, I think community engagement and activation is number one. The trust between the community and the city councils on the ground, and to the mayor in particular, is on the ground. If we can't build trust between those two entities, I think any desire I have in the future to build or to create will be very difficult to accomplish. So for me, that's number one priority. Build trust with the community. That's number one. Number two is affordability. And I've already mentioned what I'm doing with that group. And then also the next effort is small business support. Within that first 100 days, we would like to have a small business roundtable where we take the leaders who are doing elements of small business operations well. And what I mean by that, prior to COVID, there were issues in terms of how does it mean, how do you create a sustainable small business? And we know that small business is the life of a city. That's what people come to experience. But what is untold is the lack of support for small business leaders. So you have some that are paying $18 an hour, just knocking out the park. You have some that's paying below minimum wage or at minimum wage. You have some small businesses where they're providing healthcare, and you have some where they can't even afford to provide healthcare. You have some small businesses where they are paying for their employees to have transportation to get to work because they're trying to engage an employment sector that don't have reliable transportation. We need a small business board or commission that would build infrastructure in the city to sustain and support business for the long haul, not just for COVID. And there are a group of leaders that we're already meeting with, and we're creating a roundtable that will allow for them to put their strategies together so that we can have best practice. We can then measure who's doing this. We can then have a pledge of who, from what communities will we hire, what's the salary that we will hire. So we can leverage this roundtable to really improve the practices of small business in the city to make it more sustainable, not just for the owner of the business, but for the workers as well.
Yeah, and that seems like a place where bringing in some of these larger businesses like a Google or an Apple can be one of the places where they can be very supportive is sort of where they're putting their money in the community once they arrive. So it's not just in the way that they hire, but it's also in something as simple as like where they're telling their employees to go for lunch, sort of advocating for small businesses through their, HR and onboarding processes and things like that. Because I think that's, having talked to some small business owners here in Durham, there are similar uh, frustrations, I guess, about, when those businesses come, similar to folks, in the community when as it relates to housing. It's, these larger companies come, so it drives up the price of, storefronts, and that puts a real burden on a small business versus, a place like, recently we had a Starbucks make its way into our community here in Durham, and it's I think we've only had maybe one or two before that, and part of the reason was because the affordability of that particular unit had just gone up significantly, since the last time another business had been in there, and so I think that, you know as much as we want to praise, larger corporations from coming here and making investments, at times both people and businesses, it takes too long for it to make its way to them, and so they're not able to sustain themselves long enough to reap the benefits of that, those corporations being here. And so yeah, it's a challenge I think a lot of communities are facing, is this, what to do, how to support small businesses in a way that's sustainable, that's not just like an injection of cash, but really like a sort of like building new philosophies about how to support small businesses. And as you mentioned, they are the backbone of any community. That's why I enjoy traveling to places that, I can, the Starbucks in New York City is going to be no different than it is in Boise, Idaho. So, yeah, I appreciate that. For, again, thinking about communities that are often underserved, I know that Raleigh has a rich arts community, and something that if there's one thing that'll get me out of Durham into Raleigh, it's to see a good show, or go to, go to CAM for one of their new exhibits. And so I'm curious how you see the arts, how you would like to build with the arts community in Raleigh, and where you see the arts community as part of your larger plan to sort of enrich the communities in Raleigh.
This question, I think, is probably the first time I've been asked this question, but I think it's one of the more significant questions. We see leaders like Dr. Barber, right? You hear his oration and you go, wow, he's really telling us the direction we should go. Art in the history of social justice have been the documentarians. They have really told you the story. They told you the story that you probably forgot or didn't make that book. And so I think last year you seen sort of a glimpse of why they're significant. When Raleigh shut down, art blossomed. Literally, when downtown shut down, you've seen this beautiful art, enter. And so why do we make it to where art becomes the inverse of absence? And I think there's a chance with how we see downtown right now to embrace art right now. It's a chance to bring that energy, that underinvested sector of the city as well, in as storytellers, not just of last year, but the whole history of Raleigh. We're still learning history. They just changed Cameron Village to Oberlin District. And again, you're seeing where they're changing these names and these terms, and it takes art to really capture the essence of it, both music, both art itself, plays, museums. And I think there's a chance for us right now to really invest heavy into what it means to retell the story of Raleigh for this next chapter of the city.
You think there'll be hopscotch this year?
I hope so. There's been enough progress so far, but I hope so. Only because it brings everybody into the city. I mean, it brings everybody in here, and then also when you look at the crowd is a very diverse crowd. And also it brings investment and value of type of customers, certain types of customers to bring value, certain type of customer that probably will be ignored from that same region of the city. And so I just think it does a lot, both subtle, then also out front and blatant.
Yeah, it's again one of the things that gets me over to Raleigh every year is hopscotch. I guess it's you can't really call it hopscotch music festival anymore because they added
Yeah,
the like
yeah,
tech element to it a couple
yeah.
of years ago. So I guess it's just
And
hopscotch festival now.
I wanna also I forgot completely about the Truth Tour. The Truth Tour, when I think of small business, I'm also thinking about entrepreneurs. Right? I'm not just thinking about storefront. And so there's a band called Nito, and that band is playing June 15th. And so we are making sure that we uplift the local talent as well. The next month, we're having another event, another stop on the tour, and there's an artist playing. So it's not just the Terrance show, where's my picture everywhere. We're literally trying to uplift and empower existing small business entrepreneurs. And so for me, there's something about music, there's something about art, there's something about museums and documenting history that is attractive for a city. That's why people like New Orleans. That's why people like, I mean, it's just something about that makes it attractive. And I think our city is some steps behind in that effort. And I think my campaign will try to make some emphasis on how significant that is.
Yeah, I often find that art is really the thing I think is the flashpoint for a lot of communities. That happened here in Durham, in
Mhm.
places like you said, like New Orleans, even places like the sort of mainstays, Los Angeles, New York. You
Yes,
think about those places, in a lot of time, at least for me, the first thing I think about is the music,
that's right.
and
That's right.
and
That's
that
right.
often ends up being the catalyst for other types of growth.
That's right.
You start to see beautiful murals on places, or folks just, I mean, artists are very,
That's
they're
right.
they're creative by nature. They're very DIY, and so they don't need
That's
a
right.
lot to
That's
get
right.
something off the ground. And
That's right.
there is a certain entrepreneurship to that as well.
Yes.
Um, and that, unfortunately, I think also ends up being first on the chopping block in a lot
Yes.
of communities is
Yeah.
arts and arts funding, and places where art and expression
Yes.
are allowed or facilitated. And so it's refreshing to hear someone talk about incorporating and uplifting art throughout their campaign, because I think we take artists for granted
That's right.
a lot in our communities. And so we want to make sure that, or at least I feel it's important to make sure that artists are included in the conversation when it comes to growth, because unfortunately, too, art is not always um, a scalable endeavor.
That's right.
It's hard to
That's
see the
right.
big money signs
That's right.
with art compared to a tech business,
That's right.
especially in this day and age. And so, but they are equally as vital, I think, to the health of a community.
Yes.
So yeah, I definitely want to um, remind folks of that, because I've been an artist on and off for most of my life, and find myself surrounded by art a lot, and can feel the enriching nature of art that is not always super visible, but is definitely there.
My brother is an artist in New York. He has an exhibit on right now, and his character is called Oreo. Um, and he was painting during 2020. It's being celebrated now, but he was painting during 2020. And then also is a guy named David Wimbish. He's a local singer. And he was in this protest in March during 2020. He wrote a song. So all the paintings and murals that went up, they could be painted over, they could be washed away, but he wrote a song that will last forever. And he played the song for one of the conferences I attended, and we're trying to get him to be a part of the Truth Tour as well. But there's something in which art captures and stops time for a second, and I think that's valuable because we are often in an age where time is moving so fast that we think that we're experiencing something for the first time. And so David wrote that song, and so it allows for us to revisit why that moment was significant and why the history that led up to that moment was significant.
That's great. What is something, I know our time is limited, so I want to ask you a couple more things here. What are you most excited about if you are elected mayor of Raleigh?
One, right now I'm excited. One, because I am meeting some amazing people who don't require a billboard. they don't want any attention, but they're doing amazing things. For example, Union Special. I met with Andrew and he said, Terrance, I'm paying everybody in the restaurant $18 an hour. Dishwasher to the front. I'm paying for their insurance. He said, I might cut even on my, business, but I'm gonna always have these employees. I'm gonna take care of them first and I'll take care of myself. If you're looking at a spreadsheet, he will be invisible. But this campaign allows for me to meet these human beings who are not trying to. Then you have people who don't have any income and they're advocating for their community. And that's what they do 24/7 as a volunteer. And it fascinates me that somebody is so passionate about something that it becomes something they do. And it's a very hard work for nothing at all. And then you run into people who have more resources than they need. And you would assume that they are okay with gentrification. You would assume that they are okay. And you meet these people that say, this is not right. I want to put my money towards the other argument. So I'm meeting contradictions. And that's what excites me. I'm meeting contradictions all the time. And I think that's what's going to bubble up in this campaign. I think this is what's going to make this city beautiful.
That's great. I imagine that, your time, as when you are a politician, but especially as mayor, is very constrained, and you're constantly sort of bouncing back and forth to different meetings and different responsibilities. And so it's hard to continue to build those meaningful relationships. But I often find talking to other politicians, at least ones that I happen to appreciate or respect, is that that's something that they continue to make time for. And that's what really drives them, is that relationship building. And unfortunately it can sometimes get lost in the fray, but that does really seem to be the core of the job too, is relationship building. Right. Because as you have said, throughout our time together, that often your job is really facilitating getting people to the table, bridging these gaps, inviting folks whose voice, might have previously been suppressed for whatever reason, and allowing an equal playing field to build real community. And that's what pays dividends, I think, in the long term, is you want to bring as many people to the table and have them invest in one another as possible, because I believe is sustainable. There will be ebbs and flows in many other things, as we've seen made evident last year with COVID. That was something that none of us were prepared for, but I think that it it brought to light the types of communities that we have, and the people that are willing to invest in one another. That will continue, even if they, had to, quote unquote, take a loss, even if they were sort of putting themselves at risk in any way. That kind of commitment to community will pay dividends down the road. And so building that as a leader, I think, is really important, sort of pillar of any campaign. Is there anything else that you would like to share? I don't have any more pressing questions, but I want to give you some time to, if you have any. I know you talked about the Truth Tour. If you want folks to follow that, if there are other ways that folks can connect to your campaign, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, first I want to just say thank you, Justin. Your questions were needed. One, underneath all the headlines, your question really gets to the core of the job. And so I appreciate you for having wonderful questions. And the second thing is the Truth Tour will happen every month. They pushed our elections to next year. At least that's the latest news. So we have more time to engage people, and that's what I love to do. And so each month we're having a Truth Tour stop. We are committed to having a time that you would enjoy, but also a time in which you can come and meet me and ask a question directly. So this Truth Tour this month is at Junction West, which is right near the train station in Raleigh. It's at 6:30, the doors open. And then at 7, I briefly introduce the band, and then they take it from there. 8 o'clock, we then go out to support the local restaurants. From beginning to end, every Truth stop supports a small business or an entrepreneur. And then my website is Truth, TRUTH, for Raleigh.com. And in there, you can go to the volunteer tab, and would love for you to volunteer to be a part of the campaign. We will start our canvassing efforts at the end of June, early July, and we'd love to have as many volunteers as possible. And again, you can email me at Truth for Raleigh. That's Truth, the number 4, Raleigh @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much for chatting with me today. This has been great. Like I said, I get out to Raleigh when I can, but something maybe we didn't touch on, a sticky point for me is always public transportation. So, I'd love to maybe have a follow-up conversation. We could just talk about that, or
yes,
because that would certainly help. I'm a bike commuter here in Durham, so
yeah.
Getting out to Raleigh is not as easy as I would like it to be, but nonetheless, I appreciate you spending some time with me today, and I know folks will really enjoy hearing your responses to these questions and getting to know you a little bit more. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care.
All right, Terrance. Take care.
You said that you love me for a long, long, long time.